The Colossus had been dead for 30 years, and now the war was coming straight to her corpse. 60 enemy warships just dropped into the Vesta system. Petra Lind stares at her feed and feels the blood leave her face. She's standing inside the ship, 11 months deep into cutting apart 400,000 tons of the most famous dreadnought humanity ever built. Her crew of 12 has stripped the outer hull, gutted the corridors, pulled the armor plate by plate. They are neck-deep in the engineering spaces of a sealed war grave that a budget committee sold for scrap. And now the general alarm is screaming for the first time in anyone's career. Petra knows this ship. Every human alive knows this ship. The Colossus broke the enemy line at Vesta in a single terrible afternoon, escorts gone, decks burning, main batteries firing to the final salvo. She saved the fleet. The fleet never saved her. Too shattered to restore, too heavy to haul home. 30 years she hung here, a monument no one could afford to honor. There had been protests when the demolition order came down, veterans groups, editorials. Then the news cycle moved on and the contract landed on Petra's desk. She took it for a reason she told nobody. Her father had served aboard the Colossus. Gunner's mate, Turret C, the one the crew called Caesar. He survived that famous afternoon, came home, raised a daughter on stories about the old ship, and died still writing letters to the Navy begging them to maintain her. Cutting the Colossus apart felt like betrayal. Doing it carefully, respectfully, with her own hands, that felt 1 degree better than letting strangers do it fast. Now none of that matters. The panic traffic confirms what her screen already shows. The enemy fleet is in system. The front line is Vesta. The battle is heading directly for the scrapyard. Petra is standing in Firestorm's path, inside a stripped-down Legend with no engines, no shields, and no crew but 12 riggers holding cutting torches. But the Colossus still has one gun that hasn't been pulled yet. And Turret C is still intact. The battle arrived in 40 minutes, and it arrived losing. Vesta's defense squadron was 18 ships, built in the long peace, crewed by people who had drilled for this and never done it. The enemy came on in 3 divisions of 20, and they were not raiders. They were the successor state of the power the Colossus had broken 30 years ago, rebuilt, rearmed, and arriving with a generation of grudge behind them. Petra's crew had no chance to run. Their tug was a 4-hour burn from safe harbor, and the fighting closed over the yards in one. She did the only sane thing. She pulled all 12 of her people deep into the Colossus, into the armored citadel at the old ship's core, the one place in the yards built to survive exactly what was happening outside. They sheltered in a war grave and watched the war through its wounds. It went the way 18 against 60 goes. The defense squadron fought hard and shrank. Through the gaps her own cutters had opened in the dreadnought's hull, Petra watched ships she knew by name burn against the dark. The yard's tugs and tenders fled or died. Comms filled with maydays, then with less. Then the destroyer came. Human, gutted, drives failing, she crawled into the scrapyard trailing fire, hunted by 2 enemy cruisers, and did the desperate, clever thing her captain would be famous for later. She put the Colossus between herself and the guns. She hid in the shadow of the monument, hull to hull with the dead ship, and her broadcast went out on the general band, addressed to nobody because nobody was left. Any fleet unit, any unit, this is Danny. 70 souls aboard, we are disarmed and drifting, if anyone can give covering fire. Anyone. Silence on the band. Petra Lind stood in the citadel of her father's ship, surrounded by 12 riggers, listening to 70 people wait to die on the other side of the armor. And she heard herself say, in a voice she barely recognized, the reactor. Number 3 certified cold, not dead, and nobody ever emptied the aft magazine. Her chief cutter stared at her. Petra, this ship has been dead 30 years. No, Petra said, already moving. She's been asleep. My father always said it, asleep at her post. Let's go wake the Colossus. The stakes were brutally simple, and Petra laid them out to her crew in the citadel in under a minute. 70 souls on the Danny, hiding in the wreck's shadow, minutes from death. 12 of them inside the one object in the system that still, theoretically, had teeth. Relief was 5 hours away if it existed at all. Nobody would order them to try. Nobody would blame them for sheltering. She asked for volunteers and got 12. Before she finished the sentence, which she never managed to tell the story of afterward without stopping for a moment. Then they went to work, and the work was insane. And it was also, in the strangest way, the job they were the best qualified crew in history to do. Because nobody knew the Colossus like her scrappers. For 11 months they had crawled every duct, mapped every trunk, cut into every compartment. They knew what the original crew had never needed to learn, exactly what was still connected to what. And the demolition manifest, the document of the ship's death, became the document of her resurrection. Reactor 3. Certified cold, intact, flagged do not cut pending fuel removal that was scheduled for next quarter. Main turret C, her father's Caesar. Barrel sound, mount seized, listed for high-value recovery, which meant her own crew had spent 2 months lovingly freeing its bearings. And the aft main magazine. Sealed, flooded with inert gas, 41 shells for the main guns still racked. Deemed too hazardous to move, deferred. A cold reactor, 1 turret, 41 shells. And 12 riggers who knew where every wire went. Outside, the 2 enemy cruisers began their run into the scrapyard after the Danny, hunting leisurely, threading between hulks. Petra sent her people to stations that had not been crewed in 30 years, and stood herself at the breaker board for Reactor 3 with her father's ship dark around her and her hands. She noticed distantly, perfectly steady. "All right, old lady," she said to the dead switchboard, once more. And she began the startup sequence. Reactor 3 took 19 minutes to wake, and the crew of the Colossus lived a year in every one of them. Nothing about the startup was standard. The control runs were half dismantled, so Petra's riggers bridged them by hand, physically holding contactors closed at junctions her cutters had exposed. Coolant flow came up on jury-rigged pumps meant for defueling. The reactor itself, a battleship's heart built in a more paranoid age, had been engineered to restart after battle damage, after flooding, after anything, and 30 years of cold silence turned out to be just one more thing on the list it had been built to shrug at. At minute 19, the board in front of Petra went green in a rippling wave, and the deep spaces of the Colossus filled with a sound no one living had heard. The old ship drawing breath. Lights came on down kilometers of gutted corridor. Ventilation stirred dust that had settled when Petra was a teenager. Down in the citadel, a rigger swore softly and took his hat off, and nobody laughed. And along the route to the aft magazine, the passageway lights came up one by one past a small brass plate her crew had found and left in place months ago, screwed beside a hatch by some crewman 30 years dead. Turret C, Caesar. Through this door, the loudest voice at Vesta. Petra passed the plate at a dead run with her gun crew behind her. Her father's turret stood as her riggers had left it, freed, greased, and dead-eyed, its fire control links long since cut and catalogued. No computers, no radar direction. Naval gunnery reduced to what it had been 2 centuries ago. Optics, mathematics, and nerve. Which was why the 13th member of the crew mattered. Old Sorensen, the yard surveyor, 68 years old, who measured hulks for a living through a theodolite scope, and who had done his military service, a lifetime ago, as a rating in the gun plot of a cruiser. He settled into the layer's seat like a man coming home, wiped the optics with his sleeve, and looked out through Caesar's sighting telescope at the 2 enemy cruisers gliding into the scrapyard. "Well," he said, "targets at least have not changed shape." "Load," Petra said. And for the first time in 30 years, the Colossus loaded her guns. The first salvo missed. History does not pretend otherwise, and neither did Sorensen. 3 shells went past the lead cruiser's bow at 4 kilometers, close enough to startle, wide enough to shame the old surveyor into a burst of profanity that became, in the retellings, considerably more poetic than the original. The enemy ships, hunting a disarmed destroyer through a junkyard, reacted the way anyone reacts when a war memorial opens fire. They stopped believing their sensors. A dead dreadnought, power signature flat for 3 decades, hull carved open by demolition, was shooting at them with main battleship guns, and for 40 precious seconds they simply could not process it. Sorensen used the seconds. Bracket, correct, the old arithmetic chalked on the turret wall beside her father's initials, and the second salvo arrived amidships. A battleship shell is an argument from a different century. The lead cruiser did not so much sink as unravel, her spine broken in one blow, her crew taking to pods in commendable time. Her consort turned hard, streaming decoys, transmitting frantically, and put herself behind a hulk to think about her life. Inside Caesar, the gun crew, 12 scrappers, and a pensioner made a sound that was not discipline. Petro allowed it for exactly 3 seconds, her father's rule for the turret he had served in. Then the censor's woman called the thing that changed the battle. The enemy's reaction, fleet-wide, visible in the traffic. An entire division, 20 ships, detaching from the main action and coming about. Coming for them, because the enemy's officers had grown up on the same afternoon at Vesta that Petra had. Their grandfathers had broken against this exact ship. There was no military logic in 20 ships turning aside for one immobile wreck with one working turret, and that was the point. Some targets are not tactical. The Colossus firing again was a message written across the whole battle in her grandfather's blood, and the successor state could not let it stand. Petra watched 20 warships turn toward her father's ship, and understood, coldly and clearly, what she had actually done by waking it. She had not joined the battle. She had unbalanced it. The stakes rewrote themselves in real time, and Petra restated them to her crew because they deserved the truth. 20 ships inbound on the Colossus, which meant 20 ships not pressing the broken defense squadron, which meant the surviving human ships and the crippled Danny and every yard worker hiding in every hulk had just been bought time by a dead dreadnought's reputation. If the Colossus could stay loud, stay dangerous, stay alive for 5 hours, the relief fleet, if it was coming, would arrive to find something left to relieve. 12 riggers, a surveyor, 1 turret, and 38 shells against a division with a grudge. Nobody used the word possible. They used the word expensive, and they set about making the enemy pay it. The old ship could not move, but Petra's crew could move her strength. They fought the Colossus like scrappers, not sailors. Every gap her cutters had opened became a firing embrasure or a decoy. They rigged her dormant secondary mounts, long dead, to traverse on tug motors, dry-firing theater that forced the enemy to honor a dozen phantom guns. They pumped her ballast spaces selectively, giving the hulk a slow, ponderous rotation that kept Caesar's arc always toward the threat, and presented her thickest belt armor, the armor that had shrugged off the last war's worst, to the incoming fire. And the incoming fire came. The division's leading ships opened at range, professionally, methodically, and the Colossus took her first hits in 30 years. Her armor, built in an age that believed in armor, held and held. The impacts rang through the citadel like cathedral bells counting down. Between salvos, Caesar spoke. Sorensen was bracketing faster now, the old skills coming back with the smell of the breach. Their 6th salvo crippled a destroyer at 9 kilometers. Their 9th drove a cruiser out of line with her bow in ruins. 29 shells left. Then the censor's woman called a new signal, and the citadel went quiet. The enemy flagship itself, a battle cruiser flying the division commander's flag, had left the main battle line. It was coming to kill the ghost personally. Petra looked at the plot, at the ammunition count, at her 12, and gave the order that her father would have recognized, because it was the Colossus's own order, from the famous afternoon, pulled out of the histories. All hands, the ship will be fought to the last salvo. Hold the line, the old lady's done it before. Before the flagship came into range, the old surveyor proposed the weapon that no arsenal carried. Sorensen had been in the last war. He remembered what the enemy's grandfather's fleet had broadcast in its final retreat, the recording every human child had heard in school, and every enemy child, presumably, had heard differently. He climbed out of the layer's seat, went to the comms rig the riggers had spliced, and asked Petra's permission with a look. Then he transmitted in the clear on the enemy's own hailing band the Colossus's original fleet call sign. Unused for 30 years. Retired with honors. Every warship's recognition library would know it instantly. And behind it, on a loop, he sent the sound archive from the famous afternoon. The old ship's gunnery cadence, her turret bells, her damage control calls, her captain's final order at Vesta, the voices of the crew who had broken an empire's line. The dead speaking on the wind, from the actual hull in the actual place. The effect on the division was measurable and immediate. Its advance stuttered. 2 escorts fell out of formation entirely. Enemy calm discipline, pristine all day, broke into overlapping traffic that the signal's gear could not translate but did not need to. Grandmother's ghost was firing on them and speaking, and no navy in the galaxy drills for that. It bought an hour. It was not going to stop the flagship, whose commander drove through the wavering escorts with his division's honor in his teeth. But an hour was an hour, and Petra spent it on the last preparation, the one that was pure scrapper. For 11 months, her crew had been cutting the Colossus apart and staging the pieces, thousands of tons of hull sections, tank baffles, and armor plate, in tethered drift clusters around the yards. Demolition inventory. Now her riggers went out in their work pods, one last EVA under a burning sky, and quietly repositioned the clusters with tug thrusters, seeding a lane of dense, slow, invisible steel across the flagship's most probable approach. A minefield with no mines. Just the old ship's own body, laid out in the dark like a snare. "Come on, then," Petra said to the closing flagship, watching from Caesar's rangefinder hood. "Come meet the family." The duel between the flagship and the wreck lasted 22 minutes, and is taught, now, in two navies, for two different and equally valid reasons. The battle cruiser fought correctly. That is the first lesson. Her commander respected the ghost, came in on an oblique, used the yard's hulks for cover, and pounded the Colossus's citadel with disciplined, converging salvos that no 30-year-old armor should have survived. It survived anyway, barely, the citadel ringing, compartments around it caving. 3 of Petra's riggers hurt by spalling, and one, the youngest, killed at her station at the ballast board when frame 90 went. Her name was Inez Aldana. She was 23. The Colossus's final crew was 14 souls, and she is the one the memorial names first. Caesar answered and answered, Sorensen laying by eye through smoke and vibration. 7 shells left, then 5, and the flagship, confident now, committed to the close-range kill. And entered the lane. A 1,000-ton slab of the Colossus's own belt armor, drifting dark and slow exactly where a salvage foreman had parked it, met the battlecruiser's port side at closing speed. No warhead, just mass and physics, and 11 months of knowing exactly where everything was. The impact wrecked the flagship's port drive array and broke her maneuver. She yawed, exposed, wallowing. 4 kilometers away, her killer's daughter stood in her father's turret. Sorensen laid the guns without hurry. He was crying, witnesses said, and his hands were completely steady. Salvo, Petra said. Caesar's last 5 shells went out in 2 throws, and the flagship's fighting career ended in the scrapyard she had come to erase. Her crew abandoning in good order, her commander's final transmission, recovered later, a single line to his own fleet that has since entered the enemy's naval cannon as the day's epitaph. Break off, the dead here are still on duty. The division broke off, not just from the yards. Shaken, flagless, ghost-harried, it withdrew toward the fleet's main body just as the human relief force, 4 hours early because a signals officer at Ceres had gambled everything on a burn schedule, came over the system's horizon with 60 fresh ships. The invasion collapsed by midnight. In the smoking scrapyard, in a turret with empty racks, 12 scrappers and an old surveyor stood in the ringing silence, and the Colossus, her magazine spent, her duty discharged twice in 1 century, went quiet around them. Asleep again, Petra thought, resting her hand on the breech of her father's gun. Not dead. Asleep. The reckoning afterward was gentler than the battle, and stranger. The Navy's first instinct, being a bureaucracy, was to determine what regulations 13 civilians had violated by conducting a fleet action with government property that was technically scrap. The list ran to 200 items. It was quietly shredded at the level of the fleet admiral, who had commanded a corvette at Vesta 30 years earlier as an ensign, and who flew to the yards in person, walked the Colossus's smoking decks, stood a long time at frame 90 where Inez Aldana had held the ballast board, and then asked Petra Lind the only question the Navy actually had. What does she need? The answer took a year of argument, and the argument was national. The scrap contract was void, that much was instant, cancelled by emergency act with 1 dissenting vote, and the dissenter did not stand for re-election. But what the Colossus should become divided everyone. Museum, said the ministries. Full restoration and recommission, said the veterans, though the surveys said her fighting days were truly done, The last battle had spent her bones. War grave once more, said others, seal her and let her sleep. It was Petra who proposed the third thing, at the public inquiry, in work clothes, with her crew behind her. Don't display her, don't bury her, use her. She has one thing left in unlimited supply, and it's the thing the fleet nearly died for the lack of last month. She knows how to be hurt and keep working. Make her the school. They made her the school. The Colossus was towed with an escort of every warship in the home fleet, guns at full elevation the whole way, to permanent anchorage above the Vesta yards, and recommissioned, third time in her long life, as the fleet's damage control and gunnery academy. Her broken decks became classrooms exactly as broken as battle leaves decks. Her seized systems became the syllabus. Every hull technician, every gunner, every damage control rating humanity trains now spends a term aboard, learning the trade in the compartments where it was proven, twice. The instructor's cadre, the first year, was 13 names short of usual establishment. 12 scrappers, hired as founding staff. And on the roll of the ship's company, entered permanently by fleet order, one more. Aldana I, ballast board, frame 90, on duty. Petra Lind never joined the Navy. She outranked it, the joke went, and like most yard jokes, it was half true. She served as keeper of the Colossus, a post invented for her and enshrined in the Academy's charter for 26 years. Not an officer, not a curator, the keeper. Her signature, not the commandant's, is on every certificate the school issues, above a line of small print that generations of ratings have run their thumbs over. Certified aboard the Colossus by the crew that woke her. She taught one class herself, personally every term until the end. Not gunnery, not damage control. It was listed in the syllabus as manifest reading, and it was, on paper, a course about salvage documentation, and everyone who took it understood within an hour that it was about something else. She would put the Colossus's old demolition manifest on the screen, the actual document, the one that had sentenced the ship to the cutters, and she would walk the class through it line by line. Reactor 3, cold, not dead. Turret C, seized, not broken. Magazine, hazardous, meaning full. And she would tell them what she told the inquiry, the sentence that is now welded in brass at the Academy's quarterdeck, beside a small older plate about the loudest voice at Vesta. Everything on this ship was on a list of things that were finished. Read every manifest, every ship, every person you ever command, remembering this. The difference between scrap and strength is usually one person willing to check what's actually still connected. She died at the anchorage at 80. In the keeper's cabin her crew had built her beside Turret C, and the fleet gave her the honor reserved, until then, for admirals lost in battle. But the part everyone remembers came at the very end of the ceremony, unscheduled, unexplained, and claimed afterward by no one. As the final bell sounded, across every deck of the old dreadnought at once, the lights went out. And came back on. Once. The official log of the Colossus, which is a commissioned vessel of the fleet and does not editorialize, records the event in one line. It is the most visited entry in the naval archives. 2384, 11:09, momentary shipwide power fluctuation, cause not determined. The keeper is lodged aboard. The old lady saying it back. Asleep at her post, never dead. Still on the roll, still, if it ever comes to it, connected. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.